Who was Thurgood Marshall? Thurgood Marshall was the first black Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. All of the Supreme Court justices are called associates, except the head of the Supreme Court. He or she is called the Chief Justice of the United States. There are always 8 members of the Supreme Court. He went to Howard University School of Law, a historically black college and law school. He graduated in 1933 and went on to start the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund. NAACP stands for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He voted for laws that helped black people in the United States. Early years. Thurgood Marshall was born in Baltimore in 1908. His mother's family and his father's family were born as slaves. Because of these slave roots, many of the Supreme Court cases that Marshall was going to work on would be about slavery. His father, William Marshall, worked for the railroad company, and his mother, Norma, worked as a teacher. All through his early years, both his parents, especially his mother, who was a teacher, taught young Marshall about equality. They taught the 2 boys all about slavery, abolition, Abraham Lincoln, and his Emancipation Proclamation, the Jim Crow laws, and all about the fight for civil rights for everyone. Going to the courthouse. Marshall's father wanted his sons, Marshall had 1 brother, to learn more about the law and the legal system. He often took his 2 sons to the courthouse to watch and listen to the court cases. At home, after their evening meal, their father taught his 2 sons how to debate. How to debate is a very important skill that law students must learn. Marshall was a good debater, so he would make a good attorney. Top student in high school. Marshall attended Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore and was one of the smartest students in the school. He was put in the class with the best students. He graduated a year early, and he was listed in the top 3rd of his class. He went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. This started out as a black university in 1854. Most people thought that Marshall was preparing to be a dentist or some other position in the medical field. College education and marriage. At first, Marshall wasn't a good student. He didn't take things seriously. Also, he was not yet interested in politics and helping other black people. But there was one thing he did really well: debating. Another important event during these years was his decision of where to study and what to study. By now, he was sure he wanted to become an attorney, but he had to think about which school to attend. And at this time, there was one other important thing that happened in his life: his marriage to Vivian Beret. After Vivian's death in February 1955, Marshall would marry Cecilia Suyat in December of that year. Racial segregation. Before the laws against segregation, all black people were kept separate from white people. This meant that there were 2 water fountains. Blacks were not allowed to drink from the whites-only drinking fountain. One of the most hurtful things for blacks was that they had to sit at the back of the bus. If a white person came in the bus, a black would have to go to the back of the bus. If you read our book about Rosa Parks, you will understand racial segregation and inequality. School of Law. Marshall wanted to go to his hometown law school, but that school had segregation rules. Segregation separates one group, like whites, from other groups, like blacks. Separate drinking fountains, and much more. He decided to go to another school, Howard University School of Law. Marshall started to take his life seriously, so he studied much harder at Howard than at Lincoln. His mother had to sell her wedding ring and her engagement ring to help Marshall go to university. She and all their friends and family were so excited. Marshall graduated in first place in his law class at Howard University. Career. At first, Marshall opened a private law office in Baltimore. In 1934, he began his 25-year association with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Marshall served as the executive director of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He won a case where a school had segregation rules. When he was only 32, he won the U.S. Supreme Court case called Chambers versus Florida. The Supreme Courts and other courts used the letter V to show who is fighting against whom. Marshall won many cases where black people were not treated well or couldn't get jobs. He was a very successful justice. He won 29 out of 32 cases at the Supreme Court. Successful and impressive life. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy gave Marshall more important titles and jobs. Marshall argued many black v. white cases. His most important case was called Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. This was a very important case that ended with separate but equal. But this was not enough. There was no need for two water fountains. In 1967, President Johnson appointed Marshall to be a Supreme Court justice. He was the first black person to hold this very high office. There was still much work to be done towards equality, but Marshall climbed a very important step on the stairway up to the equality of blacks, whites, and all races.